I want to ask you about your background in crypto. You are predominantly in the Hex community. And we'll jump into some discussions about Hex as well, because I actually have some questions. I'm an outsider. I have no knowledge of Hex, or very, very limited knowledge of Hex. Um, and I'll start off by saying this. If you're generating a lot of hate, which Richard Hart does, you're either doing something extremely wrong or extremely right. And he has a lot of people who really love him. And I think that there's something to the Hex community. That's one of the strongest communities in crypto that I've seen. They're almost as loud as Bitcoin maxis, but they're very welcoming. Any questions that I've ever had about the Hex or the PLS ecosystem have been they've been very open minded, and they've welcomed with open arms anybody that wants to come in and ask questions. And nobody has attacked me. Because I do ask tough questions from time to time. So, crypto class, I want to start with you and ask you about anything that you want to divulge. Tell us about yourself and tell us about your crypto background.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. I appreciate that introduction and for having me on today. Thank you for this opportunity. A little bit about me. When I think about who am I often think doctor, and that has always traditionally been my identity. I'm an emergency physician. I'm also a mother. I've got two children. I've got two girls. And what happened to me was I was heavily pregnant, and truth is, I had two contracts. And during my maternity leave, one of the hospitals I worked at didn't renew my contract, and that was well within their rights. I'd served the year at that hospital, and most people would be like, that's fair game. You served your year, the contract ended. But for somebody who at that point had identified extremely strongly as a doctor, my world was kind of a bit of an earthquake happened. And my birthday was coming up, and after I'd finished breastfeeding at about 4 months and my brain was sort of piecing itself back together, I said to my husband, like, I need a moon coin. Like, he's like, what do you want for your birthday? I'm like, get me a moon coin, because I had this financial fallout from losing that contract, and I had to fund part of my maternity leave. So for me, my husband went to university with Tangent, and he had been watching Tangent for years do these crypto streams, which just seemed, for someone that was into traditional investing, quite different, quite strange. And from there, the Hex Late Show, I remember being on the holiday after I'd finished breastfeeding, watching the Hex Late Show. And Tangent, of course, that's how we got into the Hex Late Show, because Tangent was a part of that show. And that's the stream that got me into Hex, was the Hex Late Show, via Tangent and my husband's connection with Tangent. And the Hex Late Show was really like a bunch of Aussies talking about Hex in a way that we could understand, and just, banter between Aussies that really kind of drew me in week to week to week. And for the last, I always think, how long have I been in Hex for? And I have to think, how old is my daughter? Because when she was 4 months old is when I needed my moon coin. And she's now coming up to around 3 years of age. So I've been in Hex for almost 3 years. My investing background is quite traditional. I think I've probably read about 100 real estate books. I've got multiple real estate properties. Of course, a lot of mortgages that go along with those properties, but that was my style of investing. I did sort of consider stocks at one point, and it just wasn't quite gelling. And then, of course, being that I'm a consultant in emergency medicine, I have a very high salary, but salary doesn't make you rich, right? It doesn't. You just end up servicing your direct debits with your salary. And so I still wasn't financially free. I'd been, slaving and working my guts out, like working pretty much full time since I had my kids, although I've slowed down a little bit now. And I was thinking, I've read all of these books in real estate. I have dedicated myself to becoming financially free to escape the rat race. And I haven't got there despite my intelligence or despite my commitment. And it was just not gelling with me. Why am I being so persistent with my goals and not actually reaching them? And that's when, it started clicking, like listening to Richard Hart. He just really resonated with me. Like, he was the underdog. He was like, he had pure talent, but he just sort of spoke from the heart, whether people liked it or didn't like it. And he's honest, like a genuine, honest person that is trying to tell you how you deal. Because, of course, you want mad gains. You're going to deal with high volatility. Like, this is one of the highest volatile assets, cryptocurrency, that you can come across. But that is the price you pay. Like, the volatility is the price you pay for the highest appreciating asset. If you are in something that you have conviction with, that is a long-lasting project and has merit. And even then, you've got to still do your due diligence. So that's how it all sort of clicked together for me, being Australian, and the Hex Late Show, Richard Hart, needing this moon coin, but then discovering over years through Richard Hart's teaching teaching that it's not actually the moon coin that you need. It's a project that you're actually going to hold. And the whole idea, and this is why HODPRL is called HODPRL, the whole idea is that you find that asset class that you have conviction in and you hold it. You're going to hold it for one cycle. You're going to hold it for multiple cycles. You're going to do whatever the hell you want with your investment money. But the whole idea behind HEX is that it is a blockchain certificate, like it's a certificate of deposit on the blockchain. So it's for a longer time frame type of people. Having said all of that, most HEX actually is not staked. It's liquid, and you can trade it and you can do whatever the hell you want with it. And the thing that separates the HEX community and the Pulse community, and we are one community, Hexicans and Pulsicans, the things that separates us from other chains and other people is a lot of things, and there's a lot of things that we also have in common, which we'll go through in detail. But yeah, the community spirit is incredibly strong. We are a diverse community. We have all kinds of backgrounds, and we fight like cats and dogs on the internet. And our marketing, we have no cooperation. We just market all of the products for free because that's how much we love each other and we love the products. So I'll stop talking now and let you ask some questions, Evan. And feel free to please tie HODPRL in as well, because she is even more knowledgeable than me in this, or the ecosystem of Richard Hart.
The longer that you've been in the traditional financial system, and the longer that you've been fed lies by the system, it's not the hardest part is not learning crypto. The hardest part is unwinding years and years of lies that you've been told, because you have to create. It's a whole paradigm shift, right? You have to unwind everything that you've ever been taught and relearn how money actually works and how freedom actually is presented. Because you can have, like you said, a high income, but you still can be financially sunk. And so, yeah, one of the reason why I bring that up is when I see somebody like Richard Hart. And Richard Hart is a very bombastic character, right? He's very polarizing, but he's also treated very unfairly in my eyes. Just kind of like how in the United States, Donald Trump says a lot of things that get him in trouble, but I think that he's also not given fair light by the mainstream to be able to speak, openly. And I think Richard Hart has been very much treated the same way. I'll give you an example. When I go to CoinMarketCap and I look at the history of HEX, Hex had an 80 billion market cap last cycle, but it was never posted in the top 100. So there's a bias against the community. I see that, and I see that the Hex community has been actively suppressed. And I see it all over Twitter. Like, of course, you guys have loud voices, but I think that the ecosystem is not given a fair shake in order to voice their side of of how their ecosystem works. What they're trying to achieve and things like that. I see a lot of these mainstream crypto, Hex and Pulse are not listed on almost any centralized exchanges. It's very, you have to do some workarounds in order to get into the system, and so I think that Hex is not given a fair shot like a lot of other ecosystems, and so that led me to do some more research. And so my next question is, has that been your experience been in the Hex community? Do you think that Hex and PLS are fairly represented like other layer ones or other EVM chains? And why do you, if not, why do you think that is?
That's a really good question, Evan. And I'm remembering back to the Highest of Stakes documentary, and there's a guy on there, and the clip is the funniest thing I've ever heard. And it's referring to the community, how Hexicans are. Basically, Richard Hart, there's good things and bad things about centralized exchanges, and I feel kind of like neutral about them, because there's good things and bad things about being gate kept as well. So the fact that Hex was heavily gate kept mean our liquidity position was relatively low, and it allowed us to do these massive green candles that people then FOMO'd in. They found a way to get in, because when the green candles come, people find a way, and that almost perpetuated the amazing bull run it did. So last cycle, Hex on Ethereum did a 10,000x despite the gatekeeping. So it actually, we make it work for us, and it glues the community together. So I think what in some ways, yes, it is against us, but in a lot of ways, it's definitely worked for us in the previous cycle. So I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. I'm quite neutral about it. But the clip that I'm referring to in the Highest of Stakes is this guy, and he's referring referring to the community, because we're a little bit like, like rabid dogs, and we're just like, we're a little ferocious with our mindset. And he was saying, like, because Richard Hart has he's warned us against all of the centralized exchanges that could rug, like we always in the Hex community in general. As a community, we hold our own keys in our own decentralized wallet, and that's very unique because most people on Bitcoin will have most of their assets on a centralized exchange. So we're not affected by when a centralized exchange rugs. We're not affected. So the whole meme is like Hex users unaffected, because like when Celsius or BlockFi or whatever go down, or FTX or whatever it is, we're just not affected. And we're kind of, because I grew up in the system, I'm just used to not being affected, right? I find it kind of like funny and humorous that we're not affected. Like the meme is just like, I don't know, it's a funny meme, right? And then on the clip in the highest of stakes, the guy's like, and this Hex community, and then they're like, is Hex a scam? Anyway, I'm not going to ruin the documentary, but essentially he tells this like little funny joke. He's like, if a taco truck went down and the taco truck like was out of action, the Hex community would be all over Twitter, like Hex community not affected. Like we're just we love the fact that we're not affected by the problems that come along with centralized exchanges. But do we want the listing? Yeah, we do. Are we gatekept? 100, 1,000%. Yes, we are. How do we stop being gatekept? The way that the centralized exchanges work is they want there to be a Pulsechain foundation. And traditionally in other blockchains, they have this foundation, and the way that the blockchain gets people in is that they pay grants to new developers. But in Pulsechain, we don't have to pay grants to new developers because we just have amazing developers. You can just watch the stream that Hodpril and I just did. So we don't need this like grant system. Do we or don't we? Who knows? Because without the Pulsechain Foundation being dominant, the biggest exchanges, Coinbase, will never list us because it's just the way that they work. So things work for us, things work against us. There is two different parties trying to become the Pulsechain Foundation currently. And it's a really interesting dynamic because we are so decentralized that Richard Hart is never going to endorse the Pulsechain Foundation. That is how decentralized we are. He has nothing to do with any foundations. And so there's two groups of people that are trying to be the foundation. And time will tell what will happen, whether they will have adoption from the community or not. But the community is that decentralized that on one hand, they're like, we're decentralized, this is not happening. On the other hand, they're like, we can see it's holding us back. So I don't know, Hodpril, if you want to chime in on your thoughts around this, the benefits, cons and pros of the Pulsechain Foundation in terms of centralized exchange adoption.
Well, do you hear me?
Yes, good audio.
Okay, great. Overall, the whole decentralized, not on exchanges thing has a lot to do with Hex, because obviously Hex came out before Pulse and PHEX, and the fact that people stake, right? And when you stake to your own wallet. You don't stake on a centralized exchange. And so a lot of some nefarious centralized exchanges that actually secretly leverage some other people's tokens because it actually is not in your hands when you have it, didn't want to necessarily carry Hex, because by its design, you hold it yourself and you stake it yourself. You have to stake it in your own wallet. So it is a little more surprising that Pulse isn't on the centralized exchanges, because it is a direct hard fork of Ethereum. And the Pulsechain Foundation probably does have something to do with that, as well as the SEC case that's going on with Richard Hart and whatnot. We're in a kind of a sort of pause, even though we're pumping right now. So speaking of decentralization, I don't know how much of that has to necessarily do with the foundation or the SEC stuff. I don't know as much about the Pulse Foundation, though. But I know that Richard, like when it comes to him not the backing anything, he didn't even put any money toward the Highest of Stakes documentary. Just completely wants to be absolutely no strings attached DeFi in every single way. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we are what we call real DeFi, and there's a lot of different aspects to that. One of them is that we hold our own keys in our own decentralized wallet. Another one is that we're censorship resistant. So that's why a lot of us, like, we talk about the SEC case almost to like tell the general public like what's going on within the community, but not that we particularly care. And the reason is we can run our own bridge and our own DEX on our own computer. So we truly are censorship resistant. We're permissionless, like a lot of other things. So we are heavily gatekept. It's one of the things that we always have been. So in a way, it forms part of our identity. As time goes on, I believe that Hex will become more widely adopted, like Ethereum, and the price action probably will reflect that at some point. And the genius is actually in the code. So if you read the Hex layman's guide, which you can just Google on the internet, it's the easiest way to get to it. One of the things that drew me in was the maths behind the Hex staking contract. It's actually quite superb maths, and a lot of people, when they think about Hex, they think about the weird cult, crazy, aggressive community, which is all true. But they also don't see the other sides of the community. They don't see that we have people that are heavily involved in the church, theologists. They don't see that we have, doctors, lawyers, we have rappers, we have people that have been retired from a long time because they've been so successful. We have a lot of whales. We have musicians. We have artists. We have a lot of different kind of people and different walks of life. They don't see that. And they don't see the genius behind the code. So there was a finance professor, Professor Lamont, featured in the highest of stakes. And we actually did a university giveaway. So he was teaching university students about cryptocurrency and Hex. Hex was one of the cryptos that he was teaching. And we organized a community sort of fundraising effort, and we airdropped them $40 USD worth of crypto from the Richard Hart ecosystem, which involved like liquid Hex. It involved a Hex HSI. So they would be able to move around the NFT, which is like a stake, a Hex stake within a HSI that you can move around. Pulsex was another one that they got, and Pulse. So they got 4 different tokens that are part of Richard Hart's ecosystem. And he taught them about Hex. And this is a finance professor that worked for the Federal Reserve for many years. And this is a guy that comes from a traditional finance background who's a futurist and into cryptocurrency and believes about breaking down the walls of tribalism and bringing traditional finance and cryptocurrency together. Hex will get mainstream adoption. Already the big influencers have changed their tune now that we're back to sacrafice. So we've got people like Ivan on Tech going on streams talking about Hex and Pulsechain. We've got BitBoy has just done, I think, at least 2 videos now. Hex and Pulsechain. Altcoin Daily has given us a couple of tweets. Wendy O has Corey on, and they talk about Hex and Pulsechain. I've been able to reach out to some big influencers and drop them some of my NFTs, just saying, look, this is a Pulsechain NFT, and they've responded. So we're getting adoption. It's happening. It's happening in real time, which is kind of beautiful to see, right? Because Hodful and I have been in it for years, and we've never really changed our tune, right? But now things are kind of coming together in such a beautiful, wonderful way, and it is just the beginning. And there will be mainstream adoption, but I'll always have to just look back on the years where we had to fight like cats and dogs to be seen and to be heard, and to actually show people like, look at us, look over here. Yes, we're crazy, but have you read the code? Because a lot of people probably haven't, and they probably should. Because if you're into maths, then this thing's going to blow your mind.
I've noticed, so I got into cryptocurrency in mid to late 2021, towards the tail end of the last bull market, experienced the Luna crash, the FTX nonsense, and, kind of rode everything to the bottom. So, I've been through at least my first bear market. When I first came across, or I first found out about Hex, there was no mention of PLS yet. I think y'all were waiting for Pulsechain to come out. Can you? So I want to make a comment about, you said kind of the rabid fan base. I've noticed that I'll make a statement about that, and I'll ask a question and turn it back over. The first thing is, I've noticed that the rabid fan base, like the really, really in your face kind of like almost attacking level guys, have really kind of quieted down, and it's become what seems to be more of a somewhat of a level-headed community in a way, because I see like I see more of like, I see some really impressive developers in the ecosystem. They're very outspoken. They're trying and experimenting with new things. You've got your liquid loans guy, the hedron stuff, and then several other protocols that I don't know about. that if I probably dug in, I'd find some, so what I'm saying is you've got some incredible minds. And so it seems like some of the louder voices, like some of the more obnoxious side of the community has really kind of toned it down a little bit. And I've noticed that, it's pushed towards a lot of like development and innovation. And I'm starting to see that more and more as I start to see more people like Altcoin Daily talk about Hex. And my other question is, can you explain to me the difference between Hex and Pulsechain? Because this is I'm an outsider, so I haven't been in the ecosystem since day one. So what is the difference? And obviously they're both Richard Hart ecosystem cryptos. I don't know the difference between the two, and what's the timeline and the story of that?
Yeah, for sure. So just to address your first point about community and the personalities within the community, I hear what you're saying, and I do agree with you. A lot of the big projects on Pulsechain have brought this whole new level of professionalism, and which really speaks to people from traditional whales or people outside of Pulsechain, which is going to be great for adoption. And whales are needed in any sort of ecosystem with crypto. In terms of what the community is like deep down, I don't think that's really changed. I think that the ferociousness is definitely just underneath the surface a little bit more, maybe. And maybe it's because like the length of time that we've kind of had waiting for Pulsechain and then getting back up to SAC, and how Richard did sort of like this. He wasn't streaming for quite a long time. It shook a lot of people out, which was by design, right? Because he's always said 50 weeks to shake out the weak hands. So I think a lot of people have been shaken out. So after the Pulsechain launched and the SEC announced their civil case against Richard Hart, there was a 40 or 50% drop in price, and it kind of sort of prices remained like that for quite a long time. And now we're back up to SAC rate. So now that we're back up to SAC rate, we're getting all of this sort of adoption from the outside. But meanwhile, nothing had changed. The community was there. We were turning up. We were streaming. I was streaming the exact same amount as before. And we had all of these projects that for years had been developing, and they were still doing what they were doing. So nothing had really changed for the community, except we did have a bit of a shakeout, which is a good thing, right? So we're probably left with more longer term mindset people, longer term holders, which is great for the community. And just to say what Hex is, and just taking a step back and explaining the ecosystem. So Hex on Ethereum is the Richard Hart, that is the token that did a 10,000x last cycle. And the reason Pulsechain was made is because people couldn't end their Hex stake on Ethereum because the gas fees were too high. So Richard Hart decided to do a whole system state copy fork of Ethereum. So Pulsechain is a layer 1, and it's a fork of Ethereum, and it's designed to address that problem of the high gas fees, which it did. So we waited for launch for a long time. It launched. The price action initially was good. It did a 2x within a week or two. Everything was positive. All systems go. The SEC announced their case. We had a 40, 50% drop in price. We had a shakeout. And then for a long time, Richard didn't stream, which assisted in the shakeout. Richard came back, and he came back with a vengeance, announcing, this amazing team of lawyers that he would use to fight the SEC case. And now we're back up to SAC rate, and we've got the influencers that have come back. So the difference between Hex and Pulsechain is that Hex is Richard Hart's first baby. That's the certificate of deposit on the blockchain. You can stake it and you can earn yield by staking it, or you can just hold it liquid. And the price action last cycle was very nice. Then when Pulsechain launched, which is the copy of Ethereum, the Hex was copied over. So there's a Hex on Ethereum, and now there's a Hex on Pulsechain. They're two different tokens, okay? So P-Hex, or the Hex on Pulsechain, is a completely new token. Yes, it's a copy, but it has its own little ecosystem, its own price chart. And yes, the prices are fairly stable. The E-Hex price has gone down a little bit relative to the P-Hex price, but they're two different tokens, and they're on two different chains, but they're both Richard Hart tokens. So on Pulsechain, we have Pulse, the token, which is the native coin to Pulsechain. So there's Pulse. There's Pulsex, which is the token that represents the DEX. There's Inc, which is the incentive token. So if you stake your LP on the V1 farm, you get paid out in yield, which is Inc. And there's Pulses, and then there's P-Hex, which is the copy of Hex. So 1 coin and 3 tokens, or 4 assets that are Richard Hart on Pulsechain, and then the Hex that's already on Ethereum. And when you're hearing this for the first time, you're like, whoa, that's a lot. And it's really not. If you educate yourself in the space over a period of years, it really becomes quite comfortable for you. So Pulse is like Ethereum. Like Pulse is the native native coin. And Pulsex would be the equivalent of like Uni, like the DEX. It's the DEX coin. And then Inc, as I said, the incentive token. And then PHEX, the copy of Hex. The price action across the board in the last month has been very nice. And if you watch my last stream, you'll see a nice bubble chart at the start, which shows that Inc has done in the last month the 3x, and the others have performed very nicely. And if you watch Crypto Banter with the banter bubbles behind his head, you'll see that Richard Hart tokens generally are the tokens that are the green ones behind his head. So yeah, there's a lot to it, Evan. So I'll let you guide where you want to kind of go next. And I'd like Hodpril to give her take on just explaining the difference between Hex and Pulsechain too, if you don't mind.
I can go if you want. Yeah, like Claus said, there's actually a difference between coins and tokens, right? Bitcoin is a coin, crypto coin. Ethereum is also a coin, and and you can develop on Ethereum. That's Ethereum's high point, right? So there are tokens, and tokens are built upon a coin, on a layer 1 coin. So Ethereum tokens are called ERC20 tokens, and Hex is an ERC20 token. Therefore, it's privy to the same laws of Ethereum as with the gas fees and whatnot. It's on the Ethereum chain. So what happened was Hex stakers would go and they would get their certificate of deposit token and stake it for a specific amount of time. And when it came time to do anything, like unstake especially, the fees got very high, and that was partially due to NFTs blowing up on the Ethereum network. It would cost hundreds of dollars to unstake sometimes, and although people's stakes usually paid for it, it was just a huge chunk that wasn't anticipated. People didn't really anticipate that the gas fee would get this high on Ethereum. So that's why he decided to do a hard fork of Ethereum and increase the throughput, therefore decreasing the gas fees, right? So these fees on Pulsechain are negligible. NFT people can mint, buy, and transfer these things with negligible gas. You can make it a hex stake with PHEX and unstake, and it isn't taking a huge percentage of your stake like it is on the Ethereum. But like Klaus said before, it's a fork of Ethereum, right? So Pulsechain has gotten almost every ERC20 token and made a copy of it on the Pulsechain. And that's kind of where you'll say, okay, you got free airdrop tokens. Well, that's because it's a hard fork, and a hard fork is a complete copy with, of course, a few changes in mind. In our case, the throughput. So that's a little background on the Ethereum and the Pulsechain. Pulse is the equivalent to Ethereum, right? So it's the main token on its own chain. So Pulse acts like Ethereum. It's there's more of it. It's slightly more inflationary at the moment. We were just talking about that with Katie, but it works very, very similarly to Ethereum. So now there's the original Hex that's still on the Ethereum chain that you can stake and do whatever, and it's kind of expensive to unstake. And there's also the Hex on the Pulse chain, which is easier to stake. It's easier to unstake because it's cheaper. But they have their different ecosystems. They are not at parity, right? Because Pulse chain liquidity is very tied together. They're very tied to Pulse, and it has to do with Pulsex and the farms and the pools and all of that. But yeah, the Hex is the certificate of deposit token that you can stake. And then if you do what you say you are going to do, and you're able to go to fruition and then stake on time, you can get yield back. And so it's a certificate of deposit token, basically. And Pulse is the hard fork of Ethereum token. So Pulse is the cheaper Ethereum. And hopefully that kind of answers the question in a roundabout way.
Yeah, that makes sense. So every with the exception of obviously with the exception of Bitcoin's inception, because we don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, a lot of I give everybody a fair shake in every ecosystem because my goal is to obviously make money in crypto and to pursue a decentralized ecosystem to separate money from the state. I think ultimately that's my goal in cryptocurrency is to minimize the amount of power other people have over my life. And that's why I hold Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies because not only am I pursuing financial freedom, but I want to explore. I want to do what I want with my money, and nobody else has to say so. And so my question is, how decentralized is Pulse? Do they run off of a delegated proof of stake system, or what system do they run off of? I assume being a fork of Ethereum, they're a proof of stake network. And how many validator nodes do they run currently? Because I see the Pulse and Hex community are very, very adamant about the longevity of the ecosystem, and it has been around a lot longer than several other cryptocurrencies. And so I want to, and I think that this is a fair question. If Richard were to step away from the project, would the project continue in its capacity now, or if he lost against the SEC? How would that affect the ecosystem? Because we saw, like, for example, we saw what happened to Luna with Do Kwon, right? And so if Richard were to wash his hands tomorrow of the system, which I don't think he would, he's not the kind of guy that seems like he'd give up. If he were, how would that affect the ecosystem? Would it continue to function without him? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you want your system to be as decentralized as possible. And he may be. I think if Hoskinson were to step away from Cardano, I don't think that it would fare well for Cardano in the long term because he kind of spearheads the ecosystem, and Vitalik for Ethereum. So what is Pulse Chain and Hex's goal long term for decentralization? I guess would be the question. I think that those are pretty good questions.
Yeah, they're great questions. So to address the first part, how decentralized is Pulsechain? So we have 52,000 validators, which doesn't mean much, right? Because it's like, well, how many nodes are there? How many people are actually supporting the network? And the answer to that, based on my last stream from what Katie has said, and she's very good with this kind of thing, there's about 500 and plus actual people. And there's 52,000 validators. And then you could guess how many nodes each kind of person has, I suppose. So our Nakamoto coefficient should be 6. And a Nakamoto coefficient is how many users combined would hold more than 33% of all the validators. Because theoretically, in a nefarious world, they could all collude together and stop consensus. And if they were all to just stop supporting the network, then the network would go down. So the answer for Pulsechain is that there are 6 people that hold more than 33% of the validators or nodes or supporting the network. And the Nakamoto coefficient for Ethereum is 2. So 40% of the nodes in Ethereum are held by 2 people. And in Pulsechain, that number is 6. So that is one way that we can quantify how secure or decentralized our network is. On top of that, it works for us and against us, right? So when you go to pulsechain.com and you look for the official bridge, which you should always do that, go to pulsechain.com to look for the official bridge, and links, for the DEX and so on and so forth, you'll come across an IPFS link. And most people, they want the bridge link. They're like, what the F is this IPFS link? And there's also other links where you could run, you can actually run the bridge and the DEX on your own computer. There are other links for that. And this is just other ways that Richard and things that he's putting in place to further secure the network. So if Richard Hart unfortunately did a Marie Antoinette or did a McCarthy or did a whatever the hell he wants to do with his life and just decides not to stream or come back or loses a case or whatever, he gets like a ingrown toe and decides, he's going to live on a beach and just play with his ingrown toe, whatever he wants to do. Doesn't mean to us. Like when Richard Hart left for about a year to shake people out, we're like, what are we going to do? And we're going to ride or die. And that's the community spirit. So he's back, and that's actually like such a blessing for us. And the fact that the Sacrifice wallet is buying on Pulsechain is super bullish. So we're actually when the chips are against us, we just fight even stronger. And when they start going for us, we're like, oh, it's almost like it's a bit unexpected, but it never changed our behavior. So I would say that I hope that in some way answers the decentralization question. The other question, so what was the second part, Evan, to the question?
I think that was the second part where if Richard were to step away, or, I mean, I don't even want to say I would say from my perspective, it's a high likelihood that he'll win against the Securities and Exchange clowns because the SEC has a terrible track record of not doing of winning. Their track record is very good at losing, especially against Ripple and Grayscale and the precedent that they've set in going after cryptocurrencies and different projects unfairly. I don't think that they will fare very well, regardless of I've watched your stream, so I understand that Richard's got really good law firms to work with, but I think that the actions of the SEC in general have not helped their case at all, and so I don't think that that they're going to fare very well against him. So I think what's up?
Oh, sorry, Evan.
No, that was just that was the point. The other question, the first question was what? I mean, is it it's obviously you said validator nodes, so it's a proof of stake network. So you have to worry about decentralization as far as the coins themselves, spread out on the validators. Is it a delegated proof of stake system, or are you able to stake with a pool, or do you have to run your own validator node and spin it up? Like how does Pulse differ from some other proof of stake networks?
All I can say is that it's a fork of Ethereum, so it's the exact same. I think it's a delegated proof of stake. KDP would definitely be your girl, and Hodpool to answer those questions. So there is a website called pulsecoinlist.com, and there's a frequently asked question page. I was just trying to find, and it goes through that a little bit as well. But in regards to the SEC case, the best stream was the Corey Costa stream, and he had that lawyer on and speaking about the case, and that was so wonderful. But I think people should think about it a little bit differently. Like you mentioned, the SEC has lost a lot of cases, right? And picture this, like the SEC, they've got unlimited resources, unlimited money to fight all of these crypto, all these crypto people. And they're actually, their aim may not be to win all those cases. They don't give a, because they lose all their cases. They don't want people to be spending money on cryptocurrency. They like the status quo, and anything that goes against the status quo, it's not going to be good for them. So they label cryptocurrency as, criminals, or don't pay their tax, or, funding some kind of horrible things. But in reality, like I pay so much tax. I don't want to tell you because I don't want to dox myself, but I pay an incredible amount of tax. When it comes to tax time, it takes me 3 or 4 months to do my tax return properly. Every single transaction I've ever done on crypto has to be gone through, and I have to actually submit that to the Australian Tax Office. So a lot of the narratives that the SEC spin up about crypto users in general are wrong, and a lot of their motives, I think, are just to put off people from traditional finance, which is really sad, right? Because if you think of like people that are into bonds and they're earning like 7% a year, well, when you take into account inflation, how much are they really earning? Really not much. So it's in their interest to, feed people information that will make them forget about the fact that there's like massive inflation driven by debt. And basically, the Federal Reserve printing money and who pays? It's the people that have a mortgage that pay, and they pay it back to the bank. So that the whole thing is just, it's quite terrible for traditional people in traditional finance. So yeah, the SEC, their motivation may just be to put off traditional investors. And if people are, like you said, Evan, it takes people a while to kind of wake up to the fact that what they believed was happening with their money may not actually be what actually is happening. And you can be earning a great salary and doing the right thing and going to work and getting your paycheck and so on. But after inflation, and you go to Woolworths or Coles and you're spending $400 a week to just feed your family, and you're not even buying much, and you're thinking, you've got all these direct debits, and then you're left with nothing. And then you try to make an investment and you're earning 2%, if that, and you're just not getting anywhere financially despite your hard work, then people start asking questions and thinking, is there another asset that could suit me? And I believe cryptocurrency, if people are educated in it, it's just another financial asset, and it's at the extreme end. Like, it's volatile, but there's also, there's it potentially could be a big upside, but it needs to be in a project that has a very strong community, has a strong founder, has strong principles, ethics, is transparent, has great projects that are building on it, does their own marketing within the community. So yeah, I think the SEC case and what they do, it's more, the way that I look at it, it's more to put off traditional investors and put off mums and dads into going into crypto, rather than to save, people that are in crypto from being scammed. Because the only person that scammed me was the SEC, because when Pulsechain released, the price doubled, and then the SEC announced their case very publicly, and the price dumped by 50%. So the only people I've been scammed by are the SEC, and we've actually gathered together some signatures. I think we're up to 45,000 now, to actually, to show the judge that us as a community, the only people scamming us, it's the SEC, and they're doing it for their own motivations, to put off traditional investors. That's why they're doing it. They don't care that they'll probably lose, and they don't care that they're going to spend people's taxpayers' money doing it. They don't care about all that. They just want to put people off going into crypto, and kind of waking up to see that, unfortunately, the monetary policy, it's just not working anymore. Inflation's gone too high. They pushed it too far.
Good points.